Well, ladies and gentlemen, I virtually met this next speaker who is just a magnificent man. I was really touched by his TEDx talk, and he's a man who wears many hats and has done a lot of things, but you can be really inspired by the title of his book, which is Be Bigger Than You Think You Are: Overcoming Our Self-Imposed Limits to Have the Life We Want. So without further ado, he's going to show you his book. Here is Peter Alessandria. Welcome, Peter.
Great. Thank you, Sandra. Can you hear me okay? The sound is coming through good? Great. Let me just start off by thanking you so much for the invitation, and thank you for all the wonderful work that you do. It's been a pleasure getting to know you over the last few weeks. I love your book. I listened to it this week. It was fabulous. And I just want to support you in the work that you're doing in bringing this message to the world. I think it's needed, it's helpful, and it's wonderful the way you do it. So thank you. Just so people can get to know me a little bit, I'm not going to give you a biography or anything like that, but my website, you can find out a lot of information about me. You can find out about my book. It's bebiggertoday.com. It's all one word, bebiggertoday.com. There's a link there to the TEDx talk that Sandra referred to. You can also see some of the other projects I'm working on, including a film project about the afterlife, based on a book by William Buhlman. Some of you might know he wrote a book called Adventures in the Afterlife. And hopefully this time next year, I will be in production directing a feature film based on that. So let me start out my talk today by saying, well, two things. Number one, I'm going to ask you to forgive me because I haven't memorized my talk, so I'll be referring to my notes as we go. But I also wanted to say I'm not an expert on forgiveness, all right? I'm a work in progress. So I'm just going to share with you guys what I know, what I've learned. It may or may not be true for you. I'm not here to tell you that you have to forgive anybody. That's up to you. It's a personal decision that you get to make. But listen to what I have to say, and if it's helpful, great. And if not, use this as a platform to discover what's true for you about forgiveness. So let's start off with the definition. Forgiveness is a conscious, deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment or vengeance toward a person or group that has harmed you. The dictionary defines to forgive as to stop feeling anger towards someone or something, to stop blaming, to give up resentment, to grant pardon or relief. So the first thing I want to say is that forgiveness is inviting us to give up negative emotions such as anger, judgment, condemnation, attack, retaliation, and all of that. Now, I'm going to talk about in a minute why it's difficult to do that, but I just want us to know what we're up against when we're talking about forgiveness. The problem is many of us rely on these types of things to protect ourselves and to feel safe. So if forgiveness means giving up things like anger and attack and revenge and retaliation, we have to find another way to feel safe in the world. And I'm going to suggest that a little later in my talk, what we can do. I will say forgiveness is simple, but it's definitely not easy. So go easy on yourself and forgive yourself if you have trouble forgiving. All right, first point I want to make is forgiveness is something that we do for ourselves. Most people think it's something that we're doing for another person, but that's not the case. We do it because it's good for us. It also doesn't mean that we're letting other people off the hook scot-free. As I'll discuss later, we can forgive somebody and still hold them accountable for their actions. The first thing I want to say is it's good for us because it frees us of negative emotions. So there's mounting evidence that things like anger, resentment, hatred can actually harm our bodies, can cause illness in our bodies. Things like high blood pressure, heart attacks, and other illnesses are linked to persistent negative emotional states. So by letting go of these things, we can help improve our health. At the next level, if when somebody attacks us, we forgive them instead of retaliating, we avoid the negative consequences that go along with confrontation, that go along with conflict. The fact is, everyone loses when there's strife. Just because one side loses less doesn't mean that conflict and violent confrontation are good ways to resolve our differences. Now, for me, forgiveness means taking our power back. It means no longer identifying ourselves as a victim. It's about releasing the past. Now, this is a quote from my book, chapter 7, where I talk about forgiveness. It goes, holding on to old wounds usually means repeating patterns of thinking and feeling that created those wounds in the first place. Forgiveness is about rewriting the story of what other people and/or the circumstances and conditions of life did to us. This doesn't mean condoning somebody else's unloving or inappropriate behavior. It also doesn't mean blaming ourselves for what happened or denying the pain that we may have felt. But it does mean we make a new choice in the present about how we see ourselves and others by letting go of the past. In this regard, forgiveness is synonymous with healing. So the point I want to make here is that we're in charge. We get to decide what story we tell about what happened to us. And it can either be an empowering story or a disempowering story. The truth is, again, as I talk about in my book, we're making all of this up. Everything is based on our judgments or perceptions, which are inherently subjective, meaning that we see things through the lens of our experience, and that experience is not always, or that perception is not always accurate. Number 2, other people don't have to know that we're forgiving them. In fact, unless they ask for forgiveness, it's probably a good idea not to tell them that you're forgiving them. Now, why is this? Well, it's because most people think that what they're doing is the right thing to do. Justified or not, no one thinks that they're wrong when they do something. So telling someone who hasn't asked to be forgiven that we're forgiving them may actually make things worse. The message that we send to the other person is, you're bad, or you're guilty, or you're wrong, but because I'm better than you, I'm more enlightened than you, I'm more spiritual than you, I'm letting you off the hook. I guarantee that's not going to heal the relationship, guys. This is what A Course in Miracles calls forgiveness to destroy. So my suggestion is, unless someone is asked to be forgiven, the only way that other person should know that you're forgiving them is by your new beneficent attitude towards them. Jesus said, bless your enemies, and I believe he meant that literally. We should send only love and positive thoughts to the people who we think have harmed us. How else can we heal them? Sending negative energy their way only makes things worse for us and them. Now, as I'll mention in a moment, forgiveness doesn't mean we have to put ourselves in harm's way. Loving another doesn't mean we stop loving ourselves. But it does mean that we do our best to resolve differences in a way that's loving towards both people. Number 3, forgiveness means not taking things personally. It's my belief that what other people say and do is always about them, not us. This means we shouldn't take things personally, even if it's meant to be personal. When one of my nieces was around 7 years old, she was having trouble with some of the kids at school. And I said to her, when someone says something mean to you, they're really talking about themselves. Psychologists call this projection. We often project the things we don't like about ourselves onto other people. On this flip side, it's important to remember that when we feel offended or we feel upset by what somebody else is saying or doing, it's only because our ego has kicked in. If I'm upset by what another person says about me, chances are pretty good the only reason I'm upset is because I'm afraid what they're saying about me is true. So when we're not identified with our egos, we don't get upset and we don't have to take things personally. Now, I have a whole story. If you do watch my TED Talk or you read my book, there's a whole story in there about how not taking someone's attacks on me personally on Facebook about one of my photos turned into a very positive experience for both that person and myself. Now, I mentioned earlier that we all do what we think we need to do because we think it's the right thing to do. We think it's what we need to do to survive and or to be happy. I believe at the basis of almost every decision we make, it's this: we want to feel better. And our decisions are often motivated by what we think we need to do, what we need to do to survive or to be happy. This means that if someone does something that harms us, at some level, they believed it was necessary for them to do that. This doesn't make what they've done right, but it does open the way to understanding. And as we'll see later, understanding is one of the keys to forgiveness. Well, you might say, what if the other person is actually trying to harm us? In 12-step programs, they say, hurt people, hurt people. Greek philosopher Plato said, be kind, for everyone is fighting the same hard battle. And I will tell you, from my experience, most of us see life as a battle. We believe there's not enough of what we think we need to survive and or to be happy. And this makes it very difficult for us when it comes to loving each other and loving another person. But now we know better, and we can begin to question whether or not these assumptions are true. Number 4, forgiveness doesn't mean we let other people walk all over us. As I mentioned earlier, loving another doesn't mean we stop loving ourselves. The problem is many of us use, as I said earlier, we use anger for protection. Yet as most of us learn at some point in our lives, anger only makes things worse. It creates more problems than it solves. Anger says to the other person, you're wrong for doing this, and now I'm justified in attacking you. And it's your fault that I feel the way I do. No one likes to be threatened or blamed for how someone else feels, mostly because it's not true. I spent a lot of time in my book talking about the fact that we're solely responsible for what we think, feel, say, and do. We choose our feelings regardless of what someone else has done to us. Again, I'm not saying this is right, what they're doing is right, or making excuses, but we still have to decide for ourselves how we're going to respond to their actions. And we get to choose whether we respond from a place of love or fear. As I also mentioned in my book, anger is almost always preceded by fear. So what this means is that when we're angry, we're really afraid. Now, this is really important because when I communicate to another person that I'm afraid, rather than approaching them with anger, they don't perceive it as being attacked, and they're much more likely to stay in the conversation and be open to the communications. If, on the other hand, when I come at someone from a place of anger, chances are they'll feel threatened, they'll shut down, and they'll be much less likely to listen, which means nothing gets resolved. So if anger doesn't work to protect us, how can we deal with protecting ourselves with other people? For me, I say we have to learn how to use healthy boundaries. I devote a lot of time in chapter 7 in my book to how we can use boundaries to take care of ourselves instead of anger, instead of retaliation, instead of attack. For me, boundaries are the primary way we take care of ourselves in our relationships. In my experience, healthy boundaries can almost completely eliminate the need for anger and conflict. What are boundaries? Boundaries are dividing lines between things. They're a way to create a safe space between us and other people. In my life, I've found that the closer I am to someone, the more I need to have healthy boundaries with them. I use 5 different kinds of boundaries in my relationships. There's definitely overlap between them, and there's no one right boundary to use in any given situation. First, so I'm just going to list the 5 boundaries and talk a little bit about them. First boundary are physical boundaries. Second boundary is temporal or time boundaries. The third boundary are verbal boundaries. Number 4, mental boundaries. Number 5, emotional boundaries. It sounds really complicated, but it's actually quite simple. Physical boundaries determine physical contact or space between people. Time boundaries determine how much time we spend with someone, whether it's on the phone or in a meeting. Verbal boundaries determine or dictate what's acceptable in terms of the type and tone of language that somebody uses with us. Mental boundaries involve the sanctity of our thoughts and our private mental space. In that category, I often say that I'm not required to defend, explain, or justify my decisions to anybody. That's my own private mental space. I can if I want to, but I don't have to. And emotional boundaries determine what's acceptable to us in terms of another person's feeling or emotional state. All these boundaries are designed to help us feel safe and comfortable in our relationships and are usually different with different people. Boundaries are very specific. So there's no one size fits all when it comes to boundaries. In his book, Pulling Your Own Strings, Wayne Dyer says we teach other people how it's okay to treat us. And so I interpret that to mean that it's up to us to set and enforce our boundaries with other people. Yet we also have to remember that if we want other people to respect our boundaries, we have to be willing to respect theirs. This is where negotiation comes in. Healthy people discuss their needs and are willing to compromise and find solutions that work for everyone. The idea is that by setting healthy boundaries at the beginning of a relationship, before there's a problem, we never get to the point of needing drastic action to take care of ourselves. But remember, if someone is really being harmful or inappropriate, it's okay to do whatever we need to do to protect ourselves. This includes calling the police, moving or physically removing ourselves from the situation, or removing the other person from our lives. Point number 5, understanding fosters forgiveness. A Course in Miracles says to forgive is to overlook or look past. The invitation with forgiveness is to strive to see the good in other people, irrespective of what they've done. We still take care of ourselves, as I mentioned above, but we do it without attacking them or making them wrong. I said earlier, we do all that we do because we think it's what we need to do to survive and or to be happy. This is true of both individuals and nations. But now, as members of the Sunday gathering, we know that this raises some important considerations. First, if it's true that we don't die, and I believe that's the case, then it takes some of the pressure off in terms of survival, making decisions that we think we need to do to survive. Yes, the body can die and can even be harmed or injured, but who we really are is eternal, and spirit survival is never in doubt. I'm not saying we should ignore the body or our earthly experiences, but in terms of the bigger picture, this gives us some perspective when dealing with forgiveness of ourselves and other people. Second, in terms of happiness, many of us are waking up to the fact that it's not how much stuff we accumulate during a given incarnation that brings us joy. Rather, it's the amount of love that we share. True happiness is found in unity and oneness with others, not in separation or division. In my experience, many of the problems between people stem from misunderstandings. Therefore, when dealing with conflict, it's helpful to at least try to understand where the other person is coming from. The following is a little exercise that can help with that. The next time you're tempted to judge or attack someone, say this to yourself. You don't have to say this to them, say this to yourself. If I saw the world the way they see the world, and if I saw myself the way they see themselves, then I would probably be doing the exact same thing they're doing, and that makes me the same as them. Again, this doesn't mean that we agree with what they're doing, but at least we can begin to understand why they're doing it. And understanding goes a long way in fostering peace, whether between individuals or nations. A Course in Miracles says all attacks are a call for help. When we approach other people from this place, we're much less likely to respond to them with anger. Imagine if we all had enough compassion to feel love towards someone who is attacking us. How would that change things? Think about how much pain someone must be in to want to hurt another person. Sane, healthy people don't attack others to resolve their differences. It's only when we're in pain that we hurt others. Jesus said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." I would extend this and say, forgive them, for they know not who they are. This means everyone who thinks they're a body knows not who they are or what they're doing. So for me, the big question with forgiveness boils down to this. Are we willing to see ourselves and others the way God sees us? Are we willing to see everyone as sacred, divine beings and give them the benefit of the doubt? And maybe accept that just like us, they've forgotten who they really are and they're having a bad day. When someone harms us, it simply means they've lost their way. The same is true when we harm others. But to see the good in others, we have to be willing to see the good in ourselves. It's only when I love and forgive myself that I can truly love and forgive others. By seeing spirit in everyone, forgiveness becomes natural. So help everyone to see their own divinity by you seeing their divinity and seeing your own. When we do this, everything will change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Would you hold up your book for us? You'll have to say something so the camera's on you.
Can you see it?
And the title?
Be bigger than you think you are, overcoming our self-imposed limits to have the life we want. BeBiggerToday.com. Available on Amazon, available on my website, available as an audiobook, ebook, Kindle, all of that.
Oh, great. Peter, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, I know he can't see us all, but if you want to just hit your raise hand button as a round of applause. What beautiful words. My goodness. And I don't know if anybody's like me, but I caught an if only sneaking in my thoughts. If only I knew this earlier. Oh, but as we say, we human beings do the best job we can every day of our lives. The good news is the link you use to join us today becomes your replay link. And me, for one, would love to hear that again, and will definitely be reading your book. And just really from the bottom of my heart, on behalf of everyone, thank you for that. Very valuable.